Hi everyone, I am Rick Davies, an evaluator based in Cambridge, UK, and one of the co-editors of the New Directions for Evaluation special issue on bridging, evaluation and foresight. I want to address two basic questions that were central to that issue and which are relevant to this conference. Why should evaluators think in terms of foresight, and how should they do this? I want to put forward two arguments. The first is that we should recognize that a typical theory of change view of the future is not fit for purpose. I'm talking about theories of change which focus on one desired and expected vision of the future. Not necessarily one objective, but certainly one future within which one or more objectives will be achieved. Doing so is, I think, myopic and perhaps even dangerous, exposing policies and programs to unnecessary risk and perhaps lost opportunities. I think we need to get used to working with multiple alternative futures. The background rationale is that diversity can be a source of protection against unpredictability and a resource enabling adaptability. The second proposition is that building of foresight capacity should be seen as a collective intelligence problem, not simply a capacity that individuals should develop. Building the collective capacity for foresight involves at least three elements. The first is the ability to mobilize a diversity of human perspectives, both cognitive and cultural. The second is to be able to design a structured form of interaction which will constructively exploit that diversity. The third is to have an analytical framework that can be used to analyze the results of those interactions in a way that is useful for evaluators. In the next two slides, I will give one example of how those three requirements can be met. PAREVO is a structured method of generating alternative futures using a participatory evolutionary process. This method was described in detail in the second paper in the New Directions for Evaluation special issue. Each pathway in the diagram you can see here represents a storyline about an alternative future generated in one PAREVO exercise. The participants were specialists in the topic of managing systemic risks. Each of the 12 possible futures in an exercise like this represents a potential challenge to any evaluation of their work. How relevant and viable will the evaluation recommendations be in the face of each of these different possible futures? Making such an assessment can be seen as a form of stress testing. At the same time, these alternative futures may also be an important resource, prompting new thoughts about what might be relevant and useful responses which had not previously been considered. The next slide will show how the significance of those futures can be explored using one type of analytical framework. This is a hierarchical clustering of all 12 storylines. This can be constructed using a participatory method known as hierarchical card sorting, and it can also be done using AI large language models, following essentially the same instructions as would be given to human participants. I won't go into the details of those instructions here, but I can provide information later to those who are interested. The resulting structure not only includes a set of categories and subcategories for all the storylines, but also annotations explaining those categories. Each type of future represents a different context within which an evaluation recommendation may or may not be an appropriate response. An assessment can take the form of a participatory sorting exercise where recommendations are what are being sorted, and the 23 yellow and green categories define the futures they can be sorted into. For any recommendation, the sorting starts with the leftmost category and moves step by step along a preferred branch towards the right. It only stops when the recommendation fits all the futures that belong in that category. Because this is a practically orientated exercise, it makes sense to allow some fine-tuning of a recommendation in order to give it a better fit within a futures category. The final result may be that some recommendations may stay in the leftmost category because they will fit all futures. Others may end up in a category somewhere in the middle because they only fit a subset of the futures there. And some may end up on the far right because they only fit one category, and even there perhaps not well. In other words, there may be a mix of generalist and specialist recommendations along with others in between. In the background is a potentially important strategy question. What is the ideal mix of generalist and specialist responses to a set of unpredictable futures? My default assumption is that a mix of both, rather than all being of one type, would be best, but this is wide open to debate. Your thoughts, please.